Oh, hey there, everybody. We were having such a great conversation last week. We wanted to, you know, continue that conversation and be able to go a little deeper. But here's the rub today is just me and Mr. Orale himself, Omar Yanar. So
Mm,
you should probably tune in to see what we do when we don't have any adult supervision on the other
that's
side.
right.
Welcome back to another episode of the South Star Classroom. That's Omar Yanar. I am Charles. Our two other colleagues are traveling and not able to join us. I don't know. Jubilee might pop in, but I doubt it. I know she's still kind of caught
Mm.
out there on the road, but we have been kind of playing around with doing this super political show. That's not going to be this one, but we're still going to do it. Blame me. I've been busy. I've been on the road, but let's do our check-ins first and make the adults proud. Just because David and Jube are not here, we were honored what the adults would have us do. How are you doing, Omar?
Man, they love their check-ins, man.
They do.
So, like,
They love them.
they love just finding out how are we doing as human beings? Did we have that moment just to say we are human and we got to love each other? I don't know our audience because we should do check-ins with our audience, like during the comments section, be like, "Hey, man, give us the 411, Alonzo. Like, what's been going on in your neck of the woods, man? I want to hear from our audience."
Well, they can do that. Y'all can let us know in the
They
chat.
should. They should let us know in the chat. The winds in El Paso are hysterical. They're blowing trampolines into different people's yards. There's always debris everywhere. It's the windy season in El Paso right now, which tends to get real crazy. And all of that is chronicled on a Instagram site called Fit Fam El Paso, which is pretty badass, and you should check out. But I got to tell you, I think there's a ton of, and we can save this for the political show. I think there's a lot of news about what's going on with the migrants. And I am dead center of what is going on with the migrants being here in a border town in El Paso. And it's over exploded by far on the news, like crazy over exploded. Although I will say that we should check in about that sometime because there's some truth to what's been going on. And we got to have a talk about comprehensive immigration policies and how to make them right and how to get them settled. But we'll save that for the political show. Charles, what's up with you? How are you?
It's been a constant topic here in the Chicagoland area. I'll tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely constant. I'm good, man. I have, I think traveling has finally caught up. We had a great time in Oakland, the press conference. I think I sent you all that news clipping just of the work we were doing there. Around basically we talked about on this show before, right? Like inflated grades and lack of proficiency and pushing our school board to actually make some improvements there and being able to hold them accountable. So, that was interesting. But I think travel has caught up to me a little bit. I got this little nagging cough. It's not, and my voice is a little crazy. I don't feel bad per se, but I might have a little dry cough a few times. I should have re-upped on my tea before we started, but it's okay. When you're going through one of your soliloquies, I will go right there to my water machine.
I was going to say, I can
big
purposely go on a long ass soliloquy / monologue and give you that time that you need to get that good ass tea, man. It's going to be okay. We got to take care of each other.
And you told people to check in. So Toya did. She said, "Hey, family." And yes, we hosted an award show for schools that were actually making sure kids were graduating eligible for college and doing work around proficiency. What's funny is I didn't even realize that it was being taped. And like people were telling me like they were watching the stream. I don't even know where it went. It like happened and it's not on my page and I can't find it. But it's but I'm glad that people got to tune in and watch it. I don't Miss Savannah, I don't know her, but Savannah Landano, thank you for joining. She said, "Hey y'all, hey back." So
I know her quite well.
Oh, okay. And does Ice?
She's a favorite person of mine.
That's awesome, man. Well, especially if she does work around this stuff or got strong opinions, man. Miss Savannah may need to join us at some point. And you had a question from Toya since you asked for class participation. So now we have good students that are like doing that. So why don't you answer her while I refill this water?
I got you. Does ICE raid schools? So back in the 90s here in El Paso, and I am going to definitively answer the question, the Border Patrol got into some deep shit, Mama Toya, because they were illegally coming into schools and basically targeting kids, specifically at a place called Bowie High School. An old family friend of ours, Paul Strausen, was the principal there. And Paul was incredible. This guy was like a tour de force. We miss him immensely in this community and as an educator. And he not only basically was savvy enough to know the rights of the kids and push Border Patrol out, but start a very large scale lawsuit that essentially said that Border Patrol and ICE specifically do not have the rights to invade schools. Here's the rub, Toya, and this is where it's going to go to like the Supreme Court. Does ICE have the right to raid schools? The answer is no. Have there been ICE raids on schools in El Paso specifically? Not that I've been aware of. If ICE raids a school in the state of Texas, do they have the right? The answer is absolutely not. What the governor of Texas recently passed, Governor Abbott, he passed a pretty controversial law that said that basically any law enforcement agency, dude, police, Border Patrol, ICE, anyone with some sort of badge can outrightly just arrest anyone they suspect of being an illegal immigrant. So do they have the right to invade a school? Absolutely not, because under Texas Education Code, that is a ludicrous violation of the safety and the availability of that principal and or superintendent to conduct a safe and peaceful day at school. So they can absolutely not, by any stretch of the imagination, legally, both statewide or federally, raid a school. Can they hang out outside that school and wait for kids to get 300 feet away from the school and then do something? They could, if they really wanted to. And what's going on now is that you've got every law enforcement person basically jonesing to start arresting folks simply because the Governor Abbott's really given that availability. Now, here's the deal: that case is straight up going to go to the Supreme Court for sure. Like, there's going to be so many plaintiffs in violation of federal law. But the problem is, I think Abbott is hedging a bet, given the fact that there's a super majority conservative Supreme Court right now, 6-3, and saying, I'm going to do this, and I bet you the Supreme Court allows me to do this, or at least gives me some credibility on a national scale about what I'm deciding to do about the border crisis, because homeboy's going to be running for the presidency in 4 years. Yeah. He was looking at it. He was looking at running this year. Had Trump not jumped in, it would have been like a race against Abbott and DeSantis.
Yeah, when DeSantis got dusted the way he did, I think homie didn't want to take that L like that, the same way DeSantis did, and have it hurt his legacy. Yep. But good answer, man. Thank you for letting me get my tea. So let's hop into a little bit of what we're talking about, right? So this is episode 136, and we're talking about grade inflation and the impact on Black and brown students. So since we had our last episode, I went and did some more research, and I had to talk about this in Oakland, and I'm writing about it and getting interviewed about it and stuff. So it's just pretty relevant. But there are 2 articles that I found, 2 studies. One was around Black students and one was around Latino, Latina, Hispanic students. People get upset when you use certain terms in California, brother. People say Hispanic in California, they say Latinx and all that good stuff. So I want to make sure I'm not offending anybody.
No, look, people have their own monikers, and I'm not going to make a whole show about it. But between Chicano, Hispanic, and Latinx, people decide what they want to be referred to as. So, look, it's all good. We got bigger fish to fry amongst the Latino community.
And this report use Latino, so that I'll just say that.
Latinx, that's what people like. but the older generations don't use it.
Yes, and they've told me why they don't. And I think it's very interesting. Kind of sucks that the old heads have just been pushed out. But anyway, let me go through some of the notes. Here, first from the Black study. Nationwide, Black student graduation is at a low of 42%, but it's improved by 3 percentage points over the past 2 years. Over the past 7 years, Black student graduation rates have increased.
This is for college, right?
Yes.
Got it.
This is all about college, university. Had increased at almost all of the nation's highest ranking universities. The income gap between Blacks with a 4-year college degree and those without it is substantial, with degree holders nearing income parity with similarly educated whites. Remember that stat. That's really important because people like to say college doesn't matter anymore. Black women outpace Black men in college completion, with current rates as 46% for women and 35% for men. High-ranking universities often have strong commitments to race-sensitive admissions and tend to show high Black student graduation rates, debunking some claims against affirmative action. Here's one that you might find that a little interesting from your alma mater. Harvard University currently has the highest Black student graduation rate among U.S. colleges at 95%. Factors influencing Black student graduation rates include the racial climate on campus, geographic location, curriculum differences, financial pressures, and family and cultural issues. Among historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, Spelman College has the highest Black student graduation rate at 77%. The graduation rate for Black students at HBCUs is generally lower than at predominantly white institutions, but some HBCUs outperform several high-ranking predominantly white colleges and universities, and trends over the past 7 years show improvement in Black student graduation rates at both high-ranking universities and HBCUs, with some exceptions. And we're not going to go super deep into this, but before I go into the Latino side of this, any commentary off of what you heard? What stood out for you?
Yeah, I think a couple of things stood out. Thanks for summarizing it, right? I think I want to just put an exclamation point on the income disparity between Black folks who graduate with a 4-year degree and those who don't, because you made a very clear statement about, like, some people say college doesn't matter anymore. And I got to say, like, that is a statistic that shouldn't be skirted over in terms of what is it and what kind of job availability is happening with the Black community once they get out of college that may not be happening with folks that are not getting into. One thing I will make point of is that while Harvard boasts a 95% graduation rate for Blacks, for African Americans, we got to think, brother, we got to think statistically in self-selection, right? Yeah. So does this have anything to do with how great Harvard is? I sincerely doubt it. It has everything to do with those kids. Kids that get into Harvard are more likely than not going to graduate from Harvard, because think about what it took for them to get in there to begin with, right? It is not an easy thing to get into these universities. Right. It is not, particularly your highly competitive ones. And you're competing. I mean, like, I remember when I applied to Stanford, it was ludicrous. It was something like 60,000 applicants, and they admitted a class of 1,500, knowing that about 1,300 were going to go there. And the other 200 were going to show up to, like, Yale or Princeton or whatever. Like, think about that statistic. Stanford now has something ludicrous. It's like over 75,000 applicants. They're admitting, 1,500 kids. It's less than 4%, or less than 5%, meaning you're getting a lot of really talented kids. Thank you, Mama Toya, to get into Harvard. Mm-hmm. So I think the statistic that we should look at is Spelman, because what's going on at Spelman that is doing better than a lot of the other white institutions and a lot of the other historically Black colleges, that's what we should be seeing. And that's what we should look at to be like, that's something indicative, because I don't think it's Harvard that's doing anything to increase that rate. I think the kid is doing it. At Spelman, I think it may be the college that's doing something.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's you get those determined young people, but they have those structures in place to kind of help and systemically have those things. And like you said, the self-selection is just very different. Not that Spelman's not easy to get into for a Black woman, or actually they have to accept women that even if they're not Black, but they have it's clearly stated in, like, their mission of what they're trying to do and who they're trying to serve. All right, before we go a little too deep into that, I'm going to read the the article that was
Latino
around Latino students, and it's called "How Can Colleges Close the Latino Graduation Gap?" Excellencia in Education aims for 6.2 million more Latino degrees by 2030 to close the graduation gap. Despite an increase in Hispanic students pursuing higher ed over the last 15 years, Latino, I'm just going to use Latino because that's what they write.
It's all good.
Don't yell at me. All right. Latino students still graduate at lower rates and drop out at higher rates compared to their white non-Hispanic peers. Enrollment rates are similar for Latino and white students. The enrollment rates are similar for Latino and white students, with 21% for Latinos and 23% for whites. There's a significant graduation rate gap at four-year institutions, 52% for Latino students versus 65% for white students, a 13-point difference. At two-year institutions, the graduation rate gap is 5 points, with 33% of Latino students graduating compared to 38% of their white counterparts. Even in states with high K-12 Latino populations, Hispanic colleges graduation rates lag behind those of white students. Challenges for Latino students include the financial strain of college costs, with many working while enrolled to support their families and make ends meet. A concerning trend is the high percentage of Latino students who start but do not complete their degrees, with nearly 1/3 at four-year institutions and 45% at two-year institutions no longer enrolled after 6 and 3 years, respectively. Let me break that down for people. What they're saying is when you look at 4 years and retention, what we tend to look at is, did you finish in 6? We try to account for a lot of people finish in 5 or 6 years on a four-year institution. And in two-year institutions, we look at 3 years to see, usually if you don't come back within that 3-year period, if you don't finish 3 years from when you start, the data says the chances of you actually going back and finishing is very low. That's why they said it like that. EdSurge highlights the consequences of dropping out, including student debt burdens and difficulties in re-enrolling. Opportunities exist for higher ed institutions to support Latino students who started but haven't finished their degrees. Excellencia in Education encourages institutions to adapt to the needs of post-traditional Latino students, avoiding the non-traditional label, which can be seen as negative. And institutions earning the seal of Excellencia are recognized for supporting Latino students by adapting campus cultures and offering comprehensive supports, including covering basic needs like healthcare and housing. Before I go, anything stick out for you there?
Yeah, a ton. Shout out to Excellencia in Education for doing some pretty solid research. Shout out to, dude, there's some solid places that are always on my periphery when we're sending students to specific colleges. And I'm like, you should look at these colleges because the support systems, in my opinion, are pretty great. And I got to tell you, like, it's being really substantiated by seeing this list. So you've got like University of Texas at San Antonio, University of Texas at Arlington, Metro State University, Denver, where my compadre Julio graduated, my comadre graduated from UC Merced, that have done a lot of work with that student base on University of Arizona. But I got to tell you, I'm really excited to see both the El Paso Community College and the University of Texas at El Paso as part of that list. So already, like, absolutely badass. And you're seeing a lot of support at your California and your Texas colleges. Here are a couple of things that really stand out to me is, one, what the hell is going on, right? Like, why are kids dropping out at these highly exponential rates? And one of the things that the article may or may not talk about are two things. One is culture. And I can break that down into two different things. If you're coming from a predominantly Latino community, bro, it's a little bit different than a bunch of other communities, right? You are not used to the mainstream America. You are in a incredibly Latino city like El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
El Paso is 85% Latino, bro. 85. All right. There are sections of El Paso where you don't hear English. Like, it is just straight up Spanish. The majority of my students at EPLA are emerging bilingual, doc, meaning I've got over 80% of my kids that are still learning to speak English, right? That is a huge cultural shift because then they go to a college and it is away from their community. It is away from what they know. Like people are not speaking Spanish at these places predominantly unless you're in certain groups, and it becomes culture shock. And that is a radically different thing to deal with. Now, does that happen in the Black community? Maybe. You know better than I do,
Oh,
Doc.
it does. Yeah, culture is a big thing. And I mean, you actually, not to cut you off, but that was a great comment because
The
it
whole point of the
segued
show.
into the question, right? When I looked at both pieces, that was the first thing that came up was the cultural and community values piece of it. And basically, and last week we kind of had these questions, but you and Lee were talking a little bit more about K-12, which I think is important, and that's what we do. But I wanted to make sure we were talking about this cultural and university, post-secondary type of situation. So cultural and community values, how can universities better understand and integrate the cultural values and community responsibilities of Black and Latino students into their support services? And I think you were kind of heading into that place. So let me not stop your flow and let you go ahead and, I like the notion that I'm kind of interviewing you. It's kind of cool.
No, man, not at all, man. Like this is our show. I like it though. How can universities better understand and integrate these values, right? Two things. One, I think what universities hopefully are beginning to really understand aren't just the cultural precepts, right? Which is you're going into a place and you are so used to being around Latinos and Latinas or the Black community, and particularly for Latinos and Latinas that are speaking Spanish predominantly, and then they go into a radically different place. It is confusing. It is culturally difficult. It is culture shock. So places, Stanford, I'll just use an example because I went there. They have a whole thing for the Latino community called Casa Zapata. So there's a dorm that you can choose to stay in if you so wish that is predominantly Latino. And people there are Latino, they speak Spanish. It is culturally appropriate. And it's like, if you need this resource, if you need this bridge to get from where you came from in your culture to where the predominant culture of the United States is, here is a support service where I think a lot of the people on this list and Hispanic serving institutions go above and beyond. So you're talking about, UTEP is difficult because the majority of kids at UTEP are Latino. You can, in fact, it's funny, you can get a minority scholarship at UTEP if you're white, which is like straight up real, by the way. But if you're talking about places like University of Arizona, Arizona State, even Metro State University that in Denver, that supports a pretty high level Latino community, what you're talking about is three central factors. One, financial aid. So we talked about that already, the financial component. And it's not just about providing financial aid, it's an understanding that a college kid is making the determination if they're Latino or Latina every single day as to whether they should stick around, because every day that they're at that college, Doc, is a day that they're not earning income. And then what's going on, this is the second problem within the Latino community, is the cultural component, both from I'm dealing with the difficulty of culture clash and culture shock, but then their own culture, their moms, their dads, their abuelitas are like, why did you leave? So you deserted us. The Latino culture is extraordinarily close. And to have a son or especially a daughter leave the house, bro, that is like mind blowing, especially if you're the oldest Latina. Like, it is misunderstood in this country how difficult it is for the oldest Latina to leave the house, because their responsibility is basically you're the second mom in command. If I'm a mom and I'm working, you're the one taking care of the kids. You're the one cleaning the home. You're the one who needs to be earning extra money. So then there's a constant pull factor back to the community. So what is the college doing to push? It can't just be, we're going to provide you financial aid. It's got to be in like, oh, we understand that these are the pressures. So how do we work with you and your academic plan in a more one-on-one fashion so that you have a more concrete understanding of why these courses matter, what your earning potential will be, and then how to navigate the conversations at home so that you can stick around longer. Bro, those conversations are happening at some of these colleges, and it's grossly misunderstood, man. So those are big things that pulled out. But I want to kind of jump into the Black community and your thoughts, man.
Yeah, I'll stay here. I don't think it's very different. and you're gonna learn a lot about me as I answer this in between little dry chest calls. But I think that, you know, I like the question around it because one, I think going to college, especially if you're the first person in your family to go to college like I was, it's going to be a culture shock regardless. Whether you're going to a PWI or if you're going to an HBCU. And let me tell you the experience around that, right? Like, you know, I went to a local state college, and college culture in and of itself was a culture shock. I remember when I was in high school, the day before school, you laid out your outfit on the bed, like you like, oh, like I'm gonna like step into this. And then when you get onto a college campus, you see the dude that's getting a lot of attention from girls is wearing like some shorts and flip-flops and talking Shakespeare or, you know, quoting something from Malcolm X. And it's like, oh, that's what works here, right? So I think culturally, the other thing that I've heard too, I think that sometimes we underestimate. It's like, oh, well, if we're sending this black child to a HBCU, they're going to be fine culturally. And I think for the most part, you will be, because there is a shared quote unquote black culture, which is huge and not monolithic. But if you are a kid that grew up in Oakland, California, or the Bay Area, like I did, and a lot of my friends did, and you're getting shipped out to a HBCU that's in Atlanta or in the rural South, it's a different culture than what you're used to, like Greek culture. Like I have a lot of friends that pledged, you know, fraternities and sororities. I'm not part of that lifestyle. I don't have a parent that did that. So I'm looking at the rituals that they're doing, and I'm like, yeah, this is different. This is kind of bugged out. I don't even want to like engage in this. You feel me? But I just think that part is kind of important to say. But I will tell you this about the pulling back home piece. This is where you're gonna learn something about me and the people out there, and you might not like it. My parents were, while they were very proud of me going to college, and you know, and my family was very proud. Like I said, I'm one of the first in my family to do it. You know, I would get these calls from my mother every few weeks, and it's a report on what's going back, but it was always like negative. It was always something going on with cousin such and such, or these people had an argument, or this, or it's we struggling. And I just had to tell my mother one time, like, I can't do. You got to stop updating me on it, because like a lot of my friends did go back home. A lot of the black people I went to school with left, and they went home to go take care of something, but you know, somebody did tell me early, like, if you leave, you're not going to be able to finish and build the things to help them in the long run. And to be quite honest, you piss poor right now. What are you actually even going to do if you leave now? And it took me somewhat not shunning my family, but having to establish some very solid and clear boundaries around the type of news I would get and hearing, and what impact that had on me while I'm taking 20 units. I also worked full time. I had a work study job, and I worked at the mall at the shoe store. Shout out to Shoe Plus at Bayfair Mall, which doesn't exist anymore. Used to get robbed there all the time, right? Like, but those are the things that you had to do. So I think when you talk about what can these universities do to better understand, I think what they did that helped me is that they had people that looked like me that went through it, that were also first, and who could kind of talk you through these things and kind of coach you, who can help you make those tough decisions, or if you feel in some kind of way, can kind of like understand the situation and notion that you got. Because listen, you know, you are deeply rooted into your culture, but if you were on one of those campuses and it was a Latina young lady and she had different familial type of responsibilities at home, Omar might be helpful. But even still, right? Like, he's still a dude. Like, she might need somebody that was a young girl who probably was also first, who can kind of help her navigate that. Or how do you explain this to your people without, you know, shunning or offending them, or whatever the case is. So I think it's exactly what you said. I think that you got to create that space, and you got to set up for people to be able to mentor. But I would also say this to our people: all of that shit is nice to haves. And a college or university may or may not do it, and I would not expect them to do it. So in lieu of them not doing it, what would your plan be? Like, I wrote a free book to other young black men like me, because those services weren't always there until later on, when I almost did leave that place. And I think that we keep wanting or expecting on some level for these institutions that have never gotten it right, that have never been able to hold it together, to like all of a sudden one day wake up and then they got all these services. So I applaud them when they try, when they do, when they succeed, and even when they fail and they correct. But how are we as a community pushing those people? How are we pumping them up? How are we showing love to that young Black kid who decided to go to college? Because I'll tell you this, and a lot of people might get upset. I grew up around a lot of drug dealers who was my friends, and I loved them. I got a lot of friends that went to jail. I promise you, I saw people get way more love coming back from jail than they did visiting from college or the military.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally, I think that's something that a conversation we got to have internally, that we got to talk to each other about. And that's one of them conversations I don't know if I'd have in front of white folks.
I mean, look, Chris Rock mentioned it, right? Like that was one of his like major specials. Is like, you got your masters. What you think about masters now? Let me ask you this: can you kick my ass? Mm-hmm. Like Chris Rock had a whole thing.
You think you better than us now? You think you better, Joe College? No.
Yeah, and sadly, look, two things. One, you've got the conversation because, like, sadly, with the Latino population, especially in El Paso, I love the El Paso people and I love this city. But my mom has always described El Paso and Latinos as like crabs in a barrel, meaning like one tries to get up, and we've had this conversation 1,000 times on the show, and another one pulls them down. And it's like, yeah, you get all this love for being like, you stayed home, you looked after your family, but you decided to go get an education, and the inordinate amount of pressure that happens to those kids that leave is incredible. They're getting guilted by their parents on a weekly basis. They're getting guilted by their grandparents. They're getting guilted by brothers and sisters who didn't go to college. And it's ultimately like, sometimes it's like, hey, we're proud of you. But a lot of times it's like, yeah, I'm the one sitting here taking care of mom while you get to hang out at fraternity parties and like go do all this stuff. So they don't see the long-term value, unfortunately, in doing this. And worse, it becomes like you're chastised because you left the community. Like, how dare you leave the community? And that's why, like, what UC Merced, UTEP, the University of Texas at El Paso has done very well is like, those are real big commuter schools. Right. And it leads to what Alonzo is talking about in the comments, is that it solves one problem in that you get to stay home, but it creates a different problem in that you're going to college, then you go to work. Then, exactly as you said, then you come home and you may be doing housework or even more job work. And then when you got time, maybe you've got time for schoolwork, and people just burn out. So what colleges have tried to do, and this is better done really through a program. If you've all ever heard of Posse, my boy Leroy worked for Posse for years, and it's an incredible program because he wound up doing it himself and then worked for Posse for, I think, 7 years out of college, and then did maybe 2 or 3 years with them after grad school. And the idea of Posse, there's some similarities to Upward Bound, is that it's a program that high school kids do outside of school to get first different resources. So different classes, different resources, all the expectation that they're going to go to college. And then what happens, which is pretty badass, is then they send 5 or 6 or a group of kids from that specific cohort to the exact same college. So when Leroy went to Vanderbilt, he went with 4 other people that he could count on, that he could trust, that he had a community with.
Can I just tell you, Mr. Clairvoyant, that you keep answering questions that lead into the next question. So I'm gonna let I'm gonna let you cook, but completing degrees with a significant number of Black and Latino students starting but not completing their degrees, what targeted interventions can keep these kids re-engage them, make sure they get across the finish line? Continue, Mr. Yanar. Question jumper.
I appreciate that. I'm jumping all over the place. I'm glad we are, man. I'm glad we are, because time keeps on ticking on the show. So that's 2 things. Really, one is like Posse sends these group of kids to the same college. I think that's a brilliant idea. Like, one of the things that I'd love to see as we kind of grow EPLA and get more kids jumping into different colleges, whether they be in Texas or the United States, is that we're sending cohorts of kids to the exact same college, right? And being like, hey, listen, like, and I want to answer Crystal's question really well, because what Posse does really well, what Upward Bound does really well when they were doing it on El Paso, is that they were creating relevance. So if you're doing Posse, if you're doing Upward Bound, they're figuring out, what are you passionate about? Like, what do you care about immensely? Why do you need to go to college? What is it that you're going to study there that you can't get in the real world? So they create an incredible set of relevancy, because all too often what happens in the Latino community, and I probably think the Black community, is that they go to college just because they're told that's what you do. Oh, there's more money if you go to college. That's the next step. And they go and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know how to choose classes. I don't know how to navigate this system. I don't even know what I'm even curious about. I don't even know how to find out what I'm curious about. There were some of us who were lucky. You know, my sister jumped into college knowing, I'm going to study English and political science, and jumped out with both degrees. You know, there are a lot of kids that jump in and have absolutely no idea why they're there. So, Crystal, you're right. It lacks relevance because the K-12 system does a terrible job of getting kids to understand, what are my interests? How do I develop relevancy in high school? And then use that to then jump into coursework that's going to be relevant in college. And I think Posse and Upward Bound does that a really good job.
I agree with both of you. I agree with both of you, but I do have a gentle, loving push to both of you, who are two of my favorite people. I think it has a ton of relevancy, because for the stat that we both highlighted, which was the income gap between Blacks with a 4-year college degree and those without, is still substantial. It might be shrinking, but it's still substantial, with degree holders nearing income parity with similarly educated whites. And here's the thing. When I went to college, it wasn't, I went with what I call the great lie. I went meaning that if I don't graduate, I think I'm gonna end up back in these shelters that I came from. If I don't graduate, if I don't do school, I'm probably gonna end up in the legal system in some form or fashion, like so many other people, and especially men in my family. So for me, even if that wasn't true, I have a ton of friends that didn't go to college that are living great lives, making great money. But for me, it zoned me in to what I was there for. And now, consequentially, and what I do regret, I didn't do things like take advantage of study abroad programs. I didn't like play around with a bunch of different majors. I didn't do those things. I went on business, right? Like, I want to get done in these 4 years. That was like my biggest goal. I started as a psych major. I made a switch because it was not as cool as the pop psych class that I had in high school. And I switched to poli-sci, up to our poli-sci people, my poli-sci brethren right here. But for me, it was like, yo, I got these remedial courses. I'm going to go in the summer. I'm finishing in 4 years. And then after that, I'm going to go find a job and make money. Now, people can have a different conversation. I think that you are a great person. And I know Chris is a great person. Like, y'all are great people. And I think that there is a benefit and a privilege. And we got to stop saying privilege like it's a bad word. It's not a bad word. If you're going to college, you're in a privileged position. There's levels. You might not be the most privileged person there, but you get to go and think. You get to go and learn and figure out who you are. You get to like have these experiences. I just feel like the relevancy of that it had on my life is that it was just another step in me grinding. This college wasn't built for my simple satisfaction. And again, I don't fault anybody for pushing that notion, or I actually love where Crystal and Omar are coming from with it, because I think that's how kids should experience it. But the way that I needed to experience it so I could finish and not be like only 1 in 3 of the Black kids I started with finished. And a lot of people I started with did not finish. And not only did they not finish, they would have been better off never going, because now they got debt that they can't offload and they can't get forgiven because they didn't finish. Like they didn't, you got all this stuff and you have nothing to show for it, right? So like, yeah, I remember that struggle, and I'm going to negotiate when I'm in a contract dispute. I'm going to, I know that I'm upwardly mobile. And I think teaching young people that, to know their worth and to know how to position yourself to be what we call upwardly mobile. And I'm talking about this from a strictly financial place. But here's the thing. Your boy grew up homeless. Like I went to 11 schools. Like I slept on people's couches. Like I have cousins, I used to wear their clothes. You know what I'm saying? Like I remember being in church, coming around, and I got the clothes out of like my parents got the clothes out of like the little donation bin. And one of the kids was like, he got my sweater on. Like I remember that shit. So like college for me was not this existential place. It was a means to an end, and I had a job to do. And you know, I don't make a gang of money now, but I'm definitely in a different position than my parents were. So I'm not saying that to be right or wrong, liked or unliked, but I think that when we have these conversations, I want to steep it in the reality that I know and only that of which that I can actually speak to. You know what I'm saying? But that's why I love when you tell your stories of Harvard and you tell your stories of Stanford and you talk about the essence of higher learning. You know what I'm saying? Because there is a better way to do it. And I'd prefer young people to do it the way that I think you and Crystal would advocate for versus the level of fear and doing it out of self-preservation that I did it through.
Look, I give a ton to self-preservation and fear. Look, I mean, part of why I went to the institutions that I went to was predominantly because of that, bro. Like we had a huge scare when I was 12 and Sarai was 16.
I need you to stretch. I'm gonna put you on the screen, full screen. You got this. I'll be back.
I'll stretch it out. You're gonna get that tea? You're gonna get that tea? I got you.
Yes, I got
plenty of things to say. And part of that was fear-based because it was ultimately like, holy shit, dude, we only have ourselves that we can count on. Like mom and dad have done an excellent job, but the bottom could fall out at any moment. And we better do the very best job of taking this opportunity that mom and dad gave. And we better go to the very best colleges. We better get out and like not only make enough money for ourselves, but to help the family. And that was very Lebanese Latino of us to do so. And like, look, to stretch this out, Sarai did a pretty damn good job. That's my sister, Stanford grad, Stanford law grad. I decided to take it a bit further and be a ludicrous underachiever and go to a couple places on the West and the East Coast. But it was under this premonition of both relevance, kind of justifying what Crystal was saying, because it wasn't just relevant that we were there knowing that it was going to increase our availability for jobs, our price, or not price index, but ultimately our earning potential, right? It was also the fact that Sarai and I, had a concrete understanding of why we were in college, what we wanted to study, how we got ourselves there, because I think that there was relevance baked in already because we knew what we enjoyed, we knew what we wanted to do. And yes, I was a fellow political science major. I loved it, political philosophy, and everyone's like, why the hell would you ever major in political philosophy? And if anyone watches The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and like current episodes where I guess a lot of people are failing to understand how democracy and the Constitution works, straight up political philosophy. But I think what Crystal and I are alluding to is really about what am I going to understand in college that I don't have an understanding of, and how do I understand what this is not just for in terms of my earning potential or survival. It's about I have got to be in it to win it because I've got too many factors pulling me away from college. The income thing, the cultural thing, a family guilt thing, a culture shock thing. There's too many factors pulling kids away. And I think what are the ways that we can target interventions? I would say it's not just financial, which is one, it's relevance. There are a lot of college programs that help kids basically dissect what are you passionate about? Like even just doing an inventory. It's so easy for a college or even a high school to just do an inventory to be like, hey man, take this test and it will spit out what you're really good at and what jobs correspond with that. And jobs that kids have never even heard of, because that's where I think K through 12 fails miserably, Doc, is like kids only know like 5 freaking jobs. Yeah. It's like lawyer, doctor, engineer, car mechanic, nurse. That's it. Like people have no idea about like the insurance companies and the fact that like you can make $75,000, $80,000 without a college degree, by the way, working in the insurance companies, just getting trained really well. People don't know about sound engineers. People don't know about like sports management. Everyone wants to be playing on the NBA. Right. How about running the NBA?
I was gonna say
Well,
there's over 100 jobs associated with the NBA that pay very, very well. Like
you know what
team
I'm
trainer.
saying?
I mean, and I know you have to leave soon. I know you have to leave early, so we're going to end early today. But and I think
Hmm.
but bringing it back to this K-12 thing and what colleges, how to fix that relevancy. I think you have to put young people in positions where things are not going to be super foreign to them, or they have some type of there's something that can anchor them where so they don't feel like an alien in a weird land, right? And
Hmm.
so that's taking young people to trips to universities, different type of universities, just letting them walk around and see how that operates, or taking them to companies, different type of companies, right? Like companies that do require college educations and those that don't as well. Like there's a lot of entrepreneurs in all of these cities that we talk about, black and brown people that make really good money. Because let me tell you, there's a hot competition of who gets to mow our lawn here, right? And that might seem
Hmm.
menial to some people. I know how much I pay, and I know if that person has everybody on this block, and I know that he has a company of landscaping. And if I need a tree stump moved, like I'm gonna pay for it. And he does incredibly well. I would dare to say he makes more than most people that I know, right? And that's running a business, and that's putting you in those positions. I just think that again, man, we have to be dealing in places of reality without stopping people from dreaming. So again, I don't disagree at all with what you and Crystal said. I think what I was trying to offer was one person's reality versus what it can and should be. And I think this was a good conversation because I think last week we kind of trailed off a lot into the K-12 space. But what I will say, just as we're listening here, man, the way that I will tie a boat onto that and let you get your final thought after this is where that proficiency and all that stuff matters. All these inflated grades and young people getting into a place where they think like I did, thinking that I'm on par, thinking that I'm in a good place. I didn't go to Harvard or Stanford. I went to Cal State Hayward, California State University Hayward, which is now California State University East Bay. And even there, I was remedial everything. But I had an AP English that all the years I did it. I scored great in all of my math classes. And to be honest with you, also, they're starting to take away Algebra 1 as an option for middle schoolers. I don't know if people have heard that, but I was really, really dope at math because I had an incredible math teacher, Mr. Brown, in middle school. I liked the people that I had in high school, but it was clearly a different level of proficiency in what the focus was. These things have consequences for young people, and everybody doesn't have the fortitude to go work that hard, get into a college, realize you've been lied to and bamboozled, and you're now behind. And now you have to not only work, not only do these classes, but you got to do these remedial classes, which don't count towards anything. And oh, by the way, you're on the clock. And if you don't pass them, you get 2 tries. If you don't, we kicking you down to the community college, which we know statistically you don't really come back from. I think it was less than 20%. So I think I didn't get to say that last week to tie it in to why that stuff matters, or even the real life, real world aspect of it, because it's college and career. But I did love this conversation. So why don't you take us home with your final thought so you're not late for your thing, brother?
No worries, man. Thank you. That was excellent. Look, I think that there's a lot to say again about that remedial situation, because that's yet another situation that our Latino and Black kids face, is that they get there and they're taking these classes and they're needed, but they're demoralizing, right? So like, what resources can we provide? I think summer bridges are really, really important. So I'll give you an interesting example. And I think Texas A&M, of all the places in the world, does a really interesting job of doing this. And it's not on the Excellencia in Education site, which is a little suspect. Texas A&M has something called Fish Camp, and everyone makes fun of it. It's like you're going to your cult, you're going to go to your pinchy Texas A&M and cheer for the football team and get into the weird cult-like mentality. But the cool thing about Fish Camp is it happens in the summer before freshmen show up. What are they doing specifically? 3 things. 1, getting kids to meet other students, handle the social component, try to like really integrate them into the culture, because they're purposeful about getting kids in and getting them to stay, because it could be culture shock for everybody. You got kids coming from rural communities, kids coming from predominantly Latino communities, kids coming from Black communities. And it's like, let's find your group so that you've got a group of kids that you can stick around with that are your friends. And it's not saying you have to be friends with these kids, but here comes a solid support group. B, how do we identify your needs coming in? So then they're doing remedial classes in the summer. So they're not necessarily on the clock because it's happening before the clock starts. You know what I'm saying? They're coming in and saying, let's get these things done in the summer and let's cover them so that by the time the school year starts, you're with everybody else, which is huge. And that's for specific students at A&M. That's not happening for every kid. That's not happening just at Fish Camp. It's just kids that need it are getting that extra level of support, and it's happening in the summer. But ultimately, like what we're looking at here is that in order to really deal with this situation, there has to be an understanding from these folks in college of what are the circumstances that Doc and these Latino kids are dealing with, because a lot of them have never dealt with these situations before. So when you're saying, how do we support these kids, you should talk to these kids and then find these kids, graduate them from college and have them run your program, because they're going to be the very ones that have a deep understanding of what's going on culturally, societally, psychologically, what would these kids need in order to survive, in order to thrive, because we want to see these kids flourish. But if they have a lack of understanding of how to make this work, it's going to take an inordinate amount of time and effort from people in college to provide special support services that aren't just about counseling. It's about college counseling. It's about how do you even choose classes? So I find it funny that UTEP is on this list, and I love University of Texas at El Paso, but talk about a place that doesn't give a shit about helping you navigate their systems, bro. They don't sit down with you and tell you how to work the system, how to choose courses, how to identify what you're interested in. You're on mute, brother.
I said, yeah, you got to find that person in there. You got to find that insider. And I don't want you to run through your red light because you got to get up out of here. But I'm putting this, I have my book club. I'm not making them read this, but this is the poli-sci nerd in me. That's for pleasure next to the book I'm reading, which is Erasure. It's the book on the movie. It's out. It got a whole bunch of Oscars and all that stuff. But yeah, game theory, because I'm a poli-sci nerd. I will say this. Here's my final thought, and we can end on this unless you have something else to say, but I know you got to run. Here's my radical idea. I think I want to have a place where we pay teachers the way we pay brain surgeons. And in doing that, I want those teachers to have to get malpractice insurance, because if I am failed, if I get that misdiagnosis, the way that you might, and I served on a hospital board where malpractice is a real thing. Hospitals get sued a hell of a lot. I think that if you got that, if you took the money component out of education in that way, I think that you could then actually hold those institutions to account and hold them accountable to the students that they're teaching, not just if they're showing up and whatever, but if those young people are proficient in doing it. And if they are proficient, and if you are passing them with an A, telling them that they're proficient and they are not, I think that they should be able to come back and say, check this out. This is what I see. No, right? I think because the reason why I think teachers don't get held accountable, or it's always controversial, is because we know we don't pay teachers a lot. Teachers are not respected in the profession. We have deprofessionalized that role to a place where teachers are devalued, and it sucks. You know what I'm saying? So people feel bad about talking. They feel like you're punching down if you talk about accountability in schools and in education. But that's my radical idea. All these teachers about to be making $450,000, baby. They about to be making them bucks. And if you put that I know Algebra 1, then damn it, I better know Algebra 1. If you're giving me an A or not, then you need to be holding me back and giving me the piece. I'm Charles. Say whatever you need to say. And then, yes, you got anything to say? Bye. All right. The kids were able to play. We will still do our nerd out show with me and Yanar, our political show, where we'll talk about game theory.
Talk about beautiful mind.
Y'all take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. And we will see you next time. Same bat
time, same bat station. Peace out.
There you go.
Wait. Hold on. I got to push the button. We're not out yet.